I am going to give you the best evidence possible for a $400,000 Bitcoin this year in 2025. I'm not saying it's going to $400,000 a coin, but of course, people always ask me, Luke, where do you think the Bitcoin price is going to go? What do you actually think? I think there's a lot of possibilities here, and I think there is a non-zero chance Bitcoin goes well beyond $200,000 into 300, 400, 500, $600,000 or more this year in 2025, maybe in 2026 as well. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think there's a very strong case to be made for it. Also, of course, we have big news with Michael Saylor rebranding Microstrategy, keeping it simple and removing the micro from Microstrategy. So without a further ado, this is what this video is going to be about today, talking about that. The best evidence for $400,000 per Bitcoin in the relatively mid-term future, as well as, we'd be looking at a $2,000 to $3,000 MicroStrategy share price if that were to happen. And I'll get into more of the numbers why. Before we go on here, I'm in a beautiful place here in Costa Rica on vacation, my only vacation of the year. So if you appreciate me taking some time to make this, would appreciate if you liked and subscribed and did all that wonderful stuff for the YouTube algorithm and all that. So without a further ado, let's get into what I personally believe is the best argument for a $400,000 Bitcoin in the relative near future. This chart is what I think that argument is. Now, this is something that I've thought about for a long period of time, but this is the updated version of that chart from today. From one of my favorite analysts in the space here, a pseudo-anonymous guy. He was joking earlier today about $400,000 a coin, not taking any questions. And I know people have questions, so I wanted to comment on it. So what is this chart? This chart is Bitcoin as a power law normalized to gold's market cap. Now, for those of you out there that have not heard of the Bitcoin power law, the idea behind the Bitcoin power law is like it's a typical power law. What's a typical power law? A typical power law is a way we can better understand the world, right? I'm not a mathematician. I don't understand it nearly as much as someone who is a mathematician or a physicist would be able to give you 100 examples. But there are many common examples in the real world, like the growth of cities, like the metabolism of organisms, like the size of planets. There are other things in the natural world, basically kind of like network effects that follow power laws, right? Facebook followed a power law. Apple, Amazon, companies and systems and protocols that have followed network effects in the past have kind of followed a power law. Basically, every time the network doubles, it takes longer for that doubling to occur, right? Going from 100 to 1,000 users is obviously going to take longer than going from 10 to 100 users, right? And so the Bitcoin power law is basically using Bitcoin's previous 15 years and projecting forward what that power law potential is going to be. Now, the problem with that, in my personal view, and this is a disagreement I have with many of the power law maxis, but my main disagreement with that is that, okay, time is something that is constant and something we can measure. However, the depreciation of the US dollar, which is the y-axis, right? The x-axis is time, the y-axis is political currency units, the US dollar. That is an exponential way to measure a power law, right? Like imagine if you're trying to, measure something in the universe, but one of the metrics for you measuring that power law is something that's exponential, right? And as many of the power law maxis will tell you, anything that's exponential can't really survive forever, right? You can't, here in Costa Rica, there are monkeys and sloths and vipers and insects, all kinds of animals out there, which I'm sure there are literally a million examples of power laws here in nature, right? You can't have an exponential number of vipers because then the prey of those vipers are going to go extinct, right? It's like, in the same way that the natural world exponentials aren't sustainable in ecosystems, the same thing is true in the financial asset world, right? So this is one of my main problems with the typical power law, quote unquote, is that, okay, you can measure Bitcoin as a power law, but if one of the ways in which you're measuring that power law is through the lens of an exponentially decaying measuring stick, the US dollar, which the whole point of Bitcoin is remove that from the equation, well, then I think that's just not the most accurate way, because then eventually it would break to the upside as the exponential decay of the US dollar would then become a more significant factor in any given time iteration than the power law itself. So there are probably a million ways to go about correcting for that. And some would argue you don't have to correct for that. I would argue you have to correct for that. But I think probably one of the best ways you could argue for correction for that is pricing it in terms of gold. See, this is the price of gold, this bottom left chart here. This is the price of gold since 2011 per ounce, right? It's gone from $1,000 or $1,200 an ounce or so, now soaring to new highs, right? For those of you not aware, gold has been on a very major tear this year. I believe it's up 40-50% or so just in the last year or so, right? I mean, if you look at the chart, it's not too dissimilar to Bitcoin, right? Except on a longer time horizon, right? You had I mean, if you just squint and look at that line, it kind of looks like the last 5 years of Bitcoin, except for gold. This is a 10 or 15-year chart, not a 5-year chart. But the larger point stands, right, that what we've seen is a massive increase in the price of gold. And my argument would be, if we're trying to measure Bitcoin's growth in terms of a power law, is it more accurate? And nothing is perfectly accurate, but is it more genuine? Is it more accurate to measure Bitcoin in something that is decaying exponentially, which is the US dollar, or something like gold, which is having an issuance rate at a smaller exponential number than dollars, right? Yes, we're producing, 1.5 to 2.5% more gold every year, but we're producing 6 to 8% more dollars a year, right? And so none of these are perfect. I want to make that very clear. But if we're going to be measuring Bitcoin in a power law and adjusting that US nominal y-axis for the price of gold, this is what happens. This is the chart that we're looking at. Basically what we see is on the right-hand side, we see a band, and that band is getting more narrow over time. But what we see is that if we adjust the market cap of Bitcoin in terms of gold, the value of gold, the total market cap of gold since Bitcoin's inception, or since it first had a price, I should say, it's 6 cents back in 2009, right? If we're adjusting for the market cap of gold, what we see is actually it's on the lower end of that band. What I'm saying here is that the market cap of gold has increased so much in the last 5 years, from about $1,200 an ounce in 2019 to now nearly $2,600 5 years later. The majority of those gains happening in the last year or so. If we adjust the Bitcoin power law to that kind of expansion, what you see is that we have a long way to go to potentially fill this blue channel of where the price has been bouncing about between over the last 15 years or so. Now, that's not to say it will guaranteed hit the top of that channel, obviously, right? Like if we look at the last few bubbles here, right? One of the bubbles in 2021 did not reach the top of that blue channel, right? These earlier bubbles did not get anywhere close to the top of that blue channel, right? The 2017 bubble only briefly visited the top of that channel, right? However, with the way the world is today, the top of that channel is just over $400,000 of Bitcoin. There are many ways people can come to all kinds of conclusions to force, like, oh, Bitcoin's going to X dollars a coin by Y day. There's a million ways in which people could say that, but I think the best argument is this kind of argument. Bitcoin, like any other network effect, like a city, like something else, probably grows at a power law. And if we're pricing Bitcoin in terms of dollars, we also probably have to factor in the exponential decay of those dollars. What's the best way to measure that? Probably gold. And if we do all that, I think that's the best case for a Bitcoin price significantly higher than $200,000 or so. Now, I want to make it very clear, it is easy for people to make videos or write articles or create blog posts. It is easy to give an absolute and reframe your worldview to it, right? It is easy for me to say Bitcoin is going to X price, and then I can find 50 data points, 50 news headlines, or 50 catalysts that are going to prove that, right? I could give you a dozen examples of why Bitcoin's going to $200,000, and that's where it's going to top. Then we're going to have a 4-year bear market. There's plenty of historical precedents for that. There's also plenty of arguments to say we can go to $1 million a coin. I think both of those things are possible. So I want to make it very clear, I'm not saying this is an absolute. It's just a range of possibilities. And I think that's really important to consider. I think it is much healthier financially wise and for the sake of your own peace of mind to think in terms of probabilities. Okay, I'm here in beautiful Costa Rica with a family member of mine. We're having an awesome time. It's a beautiful place, checking out all the wildlife. And For me, this has been so awesome to just have a brief moment before the next 12 to 18 months that are going to be crazy. Have a brief moment to slow down briefly. I'm still working every day, as you can tell from this video, but a lot of people lost a lot of money with all of the trading and liquidations. Just a few days ago, we had the biggest liquidation event in all of crypto, bigger than the COVID liquidation, bigger than the FTX liquidation. Like, I didn't have to spend a single minute worrying about that because I'm too busy living my life. My encouragement for you, likewise, is think in terms of probabilities, right? Don't think in terms of absolutes. You should be mentally prepared for $200,000 of Bitcoin. You should also be mentally prepared for $2 million for Bitcoin, because I sure don't know which way it's going. I think it very probably could. It could go way higher than we think, way faster than we think. It all depends on what is Trump going to do. It all depends on what are the governments of the world going to do. It's really critical to keep in mind that the Czech Republic may be buying $7 billion of Bitcoin between now and the next quarterly release. You got Michael Saylor, who we'll get back to in just a moment, also buying billions of dollars of Bitcoin. We have Trump, David Sachs, Howard Lutnick, and other people in the Trump administration, right? You can like all those people, you cannot like them. The point stands, you have to think in probabilities. You are relying on the decisions of those people to have massive implications. Like, there are a dozen people in the world right now that more than anyone else have a larger impact on Bitcoin pricing than anything. And so you have to be prepared to be disappointed if those people don't do what you think they're going to do. And you have to be prepared to be amazed in case not only do they fulfill all the expectations you have, but they go way harder, way faster. So that is my big encouragement. Don't be somebody that is emotionally dependent on Bitcoin getting to a certain price, whether you're hoping for a lower price so you can stack more, or you're hoping for a higher price for a higher US dollar denominated net worth. You should be prepared for all scenarios. And that kind of lifestyle, that kind of mentality is what's going to help you actually enjoy life and enjoy every day and be able to check out temporarily and go to sleep at night without having to worry, am I going to be liquidated tomorrow? Am I going to reach my USD price target? Am I going to reach my Bitcoin stacking target? Just think in probabilities. And I think $400,000 per Bitcoin is a very, very real potential chance of happening. I think the best argument for that is this kind of visual. A power law adjusted for the market cap of gold. Bitcoin, even though it's at all-time highs, even though it's ranging between $95,000 and $105,000, it's at the bottom of this blue channel, where historically it has almost always been higher than. That's something I think that's really, really worth considering. So hopefully I made that clear, to think of probabilities, not in absolutes. I know I say that so many times, but it has to be hammered in our heads, including mine, because we watch these videos and we caught up in trying to pursue absolutes, right? We watch these videos because we're trying to get those dopamine hits of trying to be able to predict the future. And what nobody else on YouTube wants to tell you, but I'll tell you, is that none of us know the future, right? So there is a very real chance of Bitcoin staying below $400,000 and only getting to 200,000, 300,000, whatever dollars. There's also a very real chance that this trend continues to hold, and that in terms of gold, Bitcoin is growing at a power law, and we hit mid $300,000 to mid $400,000 of Bitcoin. And to get a little more bullish to the upside here, there's a chance we go well above $400,000, okay? Because here is the question. This chart, again, is for today, for today's gold market cap, okay? Remember, how much did gold grow in the last couple of years? Like, how much more money are we going to print? Yeah, you can say, oh, Elon and Trump are going to cut government spending with the Department of Government Efficiency. But if you actually go through the math, they can't. Right? We have to keep printing. We have to keep issuing treasuries. Stable coins are going to be a big medium for that happening, by the way, which we don't have time to get into right now. But the point is, I don't think gold is done rallying. I think gold is going to $3,000, maybe even $4,000 an ounce in the relative near future. And so the point is, this blue channel is probably only going to grow, only going to go up. And so if that were to happen, what if gold rallies another 50% from here? After all, it did rally about 50% in the last 12 to 18 months or so, right? So suddenly, $600,000 at the top of that blue channel, all of a sudden, it's kind of reasonable. Will that happen? I don't know. You got to think of probabilities. But all of a sudden, that's a lot higher than maybe what you're prepared for. You know, if you're buying Bitcoin, if your cost basis for Bitcoin is 30 grand, are you really ready to be looking at $500,000 a coin? That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And that is totally possible. Now, something else we have to talk about is not just the probabilities for Bitcoin, but for MicroStrategy. Now, for those of you that don't know yet, MicroStrategy is dead. The company is over. MicroStrategy is gone. It has all been repackaged and rebranded into Strategy. Some of you like that rebranding. I'm sure some of you don't. But whatever the case, I don't care. I only care about how much Bitcoin they're buying. And it's very clear that this guy wants to buy even more Bitcoin. So they have rebranded to Strategy. Yes, they just had their Q1 release to be talking about that. And so I want to go through here not only the best case for the $400,000 to $600,000 Bitcoin, in my opinion, but the best case for a multi-$1,000 MicroStrategy share price. Not saying that will happen, but I'm saying it's what I think is the best case for that, right? This is a post from my friend Jeff Walton, who is one of my favorite MicroStrategy bulltards out there, fellow kid analysts or whatever they call themselves. I love it. Awesome post. I'm going to scroll through it here. Feel free to pause and read it. It's a wonderful post, blog post about all this. The larger point of what he's saying here, just to summarize it, is that right now the price of MicroStrategy, or now Strategy, is $340 more or less per share. The trailing 12-month price to earnings ratio for MicroStrategy, now Strategy, would be in the 7 to 8 range, right? Comparing that to the other Magnificent 7 stocks, right? It is significantly lower, right? Apple is 33x, Microsoft is 33x, Nvidia is 47x, Amazon's 52, Google is 27, Meta is 29, and Tesla is 192x, right? And these charts are also from Jeff, not myself, and they're wonderful things. I highly encourage you to either go to his Twitter and reshare them or pause the video, look at them. But, awesome perspective there. The larger point I want to make here and the larger reaction I want to give here is that what if, it's not an absolute, but what if Bitcoin does break to the upside and it does rally against gold in terms of a power law way more than maybe what we're expecting? Right? What happens if Bitcoin does go to $400,000 or potentially even $500,000 or $600,000? What happens if Bitcoin does get to significantly high numbers? That's a 4x increase for Bitcoin from here. That's a 2x in NAV, right? Right now it's below 2. What happens if it gets in the high 3s, maybe even low 4s, but more realistically, the mid to high 3s, right? If the premium for MicroStrategy shares against Bitcoin were to only double, and if Bitcoin actually were to 4x from here, that would be a lot. That'd be very bullish, but it wouldn't be unheard of. That would be $2,800 per share. And that is assuming they only keep the Bitcoin they currently have, right? But the reality is that they are going to buy more Bitcoin. They have plans to buy way more Bitcoin, as we have seen from Michael Saylor's $42 billion plan. They are now executing much faster than their original timeline. They're not going to stop. MicroStrategy has a plan to buy way more Bitcoin, basically hundreds of thousands of more Bitcoin potentially, even if the Bitcoin price rises, probably at least another 100,000 Bitcoin or so, right? The point is, even assuming they don't buy a single Bitcoin ever again, and assuming Bitcoin only 4x's and their premium only doubles, that's still $2,800 a share. Now, that is insane returns. That's nuts. How nuts is that? It's important to keep in mind that not too long ago, split share adjusted, the stock was $14 back in December of 2022. Need I remind you of the chart? Okay, here's the stock back in 2022 when it was $14, $17, $20, $30 a share. Now it's done over a 10x, up to $345. And going to $2,800 is the better half of another 10x from here. That is a 200x increase in the share price for MicroStrategy. Now, most people that make these Bitcoin YouTube videos are really polished. They have a script. They, do all that, and that's great. I'm a little less polished when it comes to that. And so I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, which is all this number go up stuff. But it's also what you need to hear, which is, do you really think MicroStrategy is not going to have a bear market ever again if it does it 200x? Like, really, let's say you're a hyperbole. Let's say you think Bitcoin does have a 4x from here, which again is not unreasonable, right? Again, if gold goes up 50%, 400 grand is not even in the top portion of this blue channel, right? So if gold goes up 50%, if Bitcoin goes to, the upper half of that blue channel, if MicroStrategy never buys Bitcoin, like $2,800 a share, it's probably a higher probability than even what most people in Bitcoin are giving it, right? But the question is, do you seriously not expect a massive bear market drawdown from that price? Going from $14 to $2,800 in basically 3 to 4 years or so is a massive, massive return. And if that were to happen, again, thinking probabilities, not absolutes, if that were to happen, then I think it is almost certain there would be a devastating bear market for MicroStrategy stock, okay? Because even if MicroStrategy fell 80% from that potential share price in a bear market, that would still be $560 per share, which is higher than what it is now. 80% is probably too conservative of a bear market drop if we got that 200x increase in MicroStrategy shares and we went up to $2,800 a share, right? We're probably going below $500 if we go back to that, right? That's still an insane return, going from $14 to $560 from bear market to bear market bottom. My point here is to say you need an exit plan when it comes to MicroStrategy. A lot of people like being a MicroStrategy and they're trying to trade MicroStrategy. The first thing I would say is that if you have less than half of Bitcoin, you probably should not be playing at all in MicroStrategy. You got to focus on getting to half a Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin or 5 Bitcoin or whatever your stacking goal is. Get to that stacking goal first before you even play with the MicroStrategy stocks, before you even click on another headline about MicroStrategy, before you waste any more time going down any more YouTube rabbit holes about things that don't apply. You need right now to focus on getting to your stacking goal. Because what I am saying here, yes, should excite you a little bit when numbers go up, but it also should terrify you that you probably have less time than what you would like to admit to get to the Bitcoin stacking goal that you are trying to get to. But for those of you that do have more than a Bitcoin, that do have more than half a Bitcoin, 10 Bitcoin, whatever, those of you that do have the capital to justify playing a little bit of MicroStrategy, it's still really worthwhile emphasizing MicroStrategy is a trade. I'm a MicroStrategy shareholder. I love it. I love what Michael Saylor is doing. I love the guy. Listen to his podcast for literally hundreds and hundreds of hours, probably, well over 1,000 hours at this point, right? Like, I love the guy. I love the company. I love what they're doing. I think it's really important. They are acting as the Trojan horse for the entirety of Wall Street. You are taking advantage of the premium of these stocks. They are printing US dollars, essentially. They are borrowing US dollars to buy more Bitcoin. It's a great stock. They have a great, great future. But you need an exit plan. You do not want to be holding all of your little MicroStrategy shares when we hit $1,000, $2,000, maybe even $3,000. Maybe. You don't want to be holding all of that at the top because whatever your current MicroStrategy allocation is probably going to double against Bitcoin. Let's say you have a 10% allocation of MicroStrategy, 90% in Bitcoin. That's going to turn into a 20% allocation against your Bitcoin at the top. And that 20% is probably going to fall 80%, maybe even 90% in terms of dollars, right? It's probably not a good idea to hold that on the way down, right? In the same way, it's acceptable maybe to hold it on the way up. It is definitely not acceptable to hold it on the way down, right? You need a MicroStrategy exit plan if you own MicroStrategy, right? You probably want to have a Bitcoin over-the-counter desk, meaning you can convert large amounts of cash, large amounts of stock into large amounts of self-custody Bitcoin really quick because the number one consequence is time. Yes, the fees matter of the exchange you're using, but the much more important thing is time. You don't want to sell $500,000 of MicroStrategy on Fidelity and then have your bank flag it for suspicious activity when you move it to your bank account to then convert it to self-custody Bitcoin. You don't want to deal with that, okay? I've worked with dozens of examples of people that have had 5 figures, 6 figures, and yes, even 7 figures amount of capital stuck in the stupid, archaic, traditional finance banking system. Trust me, you don't like to deal with that. And so it is probably a good plan to have a Bitcoin OTC desk prepared before that moment, because it's too late to start preparing for that once you're already beginning selling. You want a quick transition. And more importantly than that, even, you want a grade A self-custody, tax advantaged, and lawsuit mitigated self-custody setup for that Bitcoin. This is your biggest risk. Going from a $100,000 MicroStrategy buy back when it was really cheap to then within 1 to 2 years be sitting on $3 million, $7 million, $2 million, $500,000, whatever it is for you, of MicroStrategy stock, right? Like that's the most painful thing is for you to have a 20x in your net worth, and all of a sudden you're trying to wing it, figuring out how do I convert it into cash and Bitcoin, and how do I move it? How do I self-custody it, right? It's like, you don't want to deal with that. That's where people make mistakes. That's where all of a sudden the lawsuits come, typically only if you're dealing with multi-7-figure amounts, right? That's where those come that you weren't prepared for because you didn't have it in the proper trust. That's where the tax bills come because you could have mitigated your tax down a little bit, but you didn't because you didn't fill out some stupid form, or you didn't ask the right questions before you did it, or you did it on the wrong day, or like those kinds of things are very hard to reverse once the action has been done. And so you want to make sure to have a proper plan for those things beforehand. So my point is, it is too late to make a well thought out plan when said events are already unfolding. Yes, these things should excite you, that these kinds of prices are possible, not guaranteed, but very possible, potentially even higher. That should excite you. But at the same time, if you believe that is possible, you should be making a plan just in case that actually happens. If this is you, if you're somebody that has an uncomfortable amount of MicroStrategy, let's say, and you are excited but also a little bit nervous of it doing another 5 to 10x from here, feel free to text me, MicroStrategy exit plan, or whatever you're looking to do. Send your name, email, goals, whatever you're trying to do. Like, I'm happy to reach out. Like I said, like, I'm a bit distracted right now, but more than happy to help. There is still time. There is time to get ahead of this. The last thing you want is to be staring at a massive vertical green candle on your stock brokerage and realize, oh crap, I don't have a tax plan. I don't have a legal plan. I don't have a self-custody plan. I don't have a banking transition plan. I have no plan, because literally every single day at the very pico top of that market matters. Every single week at the pico top of that market matters. That is my big encouragement. Reach out if you feel like you're underprepared for those things, right? So this is my, devil's advocate here. What if the cycle is actually different? And this cycle, we get less upside. Let's say that this chart is wrong. Let's say that pricing Bitcoin in a power law and adjusting it for gold, let's say that's wrong. Let's say diminishing returns all the way, right? Let's say we only get $200,000, $250,000, whatever it is a coin, and that's the high until 2029 or whatever, right? Let's say you're the more bearish side, or what most people would say is the bearish side. I think that would mean the cycle is totally different, right? We have a little less upside, and we probably have a little less downside. Maybe we only go up to 250,000, and then we fall 50% back down to 125,000, which, by the way, is still higher than here. But let's say that were to happen. Let's say we have less upside than what many of the Omega Candle bulls are hoping for, but then probably we have the cycle break, and we have less downside. Instead of an 80% correction for Bitcoin, we have a 50% correction. I think that would be a massive win for Bitcoin. I think that would signal massive amounts of institutional demand. When Bitcoin's 125 grand, people would be saying, oh, I told you, the Omega Candle nerds were wrong. Luke Broyles was wrong. Everyone was wrong. And we're going to 90K next, right? And then, no, actually, the cycle breaks. We don't go quite as low. And then from there, we just keep going up. I think this is a very real possibility of happening. I think that is probably what would happen if this time is actually different. However, what if this time is not different? What if this cycle actually is the exact same as previous bear markets? We have the same kind of ridiculous upside, right, as 2014, 2017, even 2021 cycles. But then we probably have closer to that 75 to 80% downside, right? If this cycle is the exact same, let's say we go to 400 and then we crash all the way back below 100 grand. And literally, 2 years from today, we're at the exact same Bitcoin price that we are at right now, which is $96,724, right? Wouldn't that be funny? And so my point is, I don't know which way it's going to go. My encouragement is, in both of these scenarios, people are going to get wrecked. If this cycle is different, people are going to get wrecked to the upside when Bitcoin's 250 grand and people are saying, oh my goodness, it has to now go to 400 or 500 grand. Oh my goodness, it's going so much higher. They get wrecked to the upside by being too certain that it's going to keep going up. And then they get wrecked to the downside saying, oh, well, we're still going to have a bigger bear market, as big of a bear market. They can get wrecked to the upside and then get wrecked on the downside. And likewise, if this cycle isn't any different and it's actually the same, I think that's actually more optimistic for Bitcoin in the long term, because that would actually signal we're way earlier than what we expect, but I digress. The point is, in that scenario, people would get wrecked as well, because we would go to 400 grand. Everyone that was calling for 250 grand as an absolute would be totally wrecked, because now Bitcoin's another 50 to 80% higher than what they were calling for. And now everyone's saying, oh, it's going to 1 million or whatever, right? And so they get wrecked again to the upside, and then they get wrecked back down the downside where they say, it's never going below 100 grand again, right? My point is, be careful what you wish for. If you're wishing for $500,000 to $1 million Bitcoin, you probably should be prepared for a lot of downside volatility as well. And if you're wishing for diminishing returns, be careful what you wish for, because yes, we'll probably have smaller bear markets, but we'll probably have less upside as well, right? So be careful what you wish for. Everything has a trade-off. Nothing is free. If we get higher returns, we probably have a deeper bear market. If we get lower returns, we probably have a more shallow bear market, and then just keep going from there, right? So the larger point, and this is the real point I want to make, right? And this is the whole basis of the video, right? Of the best evidence for $400,000 of Bitcoin, right? The best evidence for that is the market cap increase of gold, in my opinion. Like I was showing you earlier, right? Many people are quick to say, oh, when Bitcoin reaches gold parity, it's going to be X dollars a coin. Okay, well, 10 years ago, when Tour de Meester, and in 2013, I believe, so actually 12 years ago when Tour de Meester was saying that exact same thing, the number then was 300 grand. So gold's done a triple since then. So now it's 900 grand. Right? Everyone right now is saying, I'm so bullish on Bitcoin. It's basically a 10x from here because it's going to 900 grand when it reaches gold parity. My larger point here is that I think the best case for Bitcoin breaking to the upside is gold also has been breaking to the upside and reaching high after high after high. And if we map those two assets in this power law channel here, that's essentially what we get. I think that's the best case. Gold, I think, is historically undervalued against stocks and against every other asset, right? And historically, gold has been a much larger share of global wealth than what it is right now, right? So if gold is historically dramatically undervalued because of these ridiculous stock premiums, like we were looking at before, right? Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, the entire NASDAQ and S&P 500, right? Because stocks are so ridiculously overvalued, and because the US government cannot allow house prices or stock prices to fall, because that would then begin to destroy tax receipts, we have to keep those premiums high, which means that probably gold also is going to have multiples higher of a premium. And what that means is that Bitcoin, when it reaches gold parity, it's not going to be $900,000, right? In the same way, 12 years ago, Bitcoin's not going to be $300,000 when it reaches gold parity. That's what they were saying 12 years ago. Now it's $900,000. It's a moving target. And by the time Bitcoin actually reaches gold parity, we could be looking at a multi-million-dollar Bitcoin. Okay. Again, think of probabilities, but I really think it is far more likely Bitcoin's going to be multiple millions of dollars before it hits gold parity than after gold parity, right? Bitcoin could be $3, $4, maybe even $5 million and still have not yet hit gold parity, right? $900,000 times 6, is roughly this amount, right? And we really have no idea how much money they're going to print, how many US dollars are going to print. And so that's my larger point, that people are really focused on, Luke, what is this cycle going to do? Are we going to go up? How high are we going to go? Do you think we'll reach 300 grand? Do you think that? And that's my honest thought. That's where I think we're going. I think we could go to only 200. I think we could go to a million. But I think the best evidence, the best case for Bitcoin adjusting to the upside is a continued expansion of gold to the upside. And likewise, then if you do the math of MicroStrategy, the math gets even more ridiculous, even more insane. You are not bullish enough. That is my very, very strong takeaway from here, that if you're pricing in terms of dollars, there is no top, obviously, because there's no bottom to fiat, right? And the best way to measure that is with gold. And I think that is a thing to keep in mind, is that that's probably what's going to happen. And everything has a trade-off. I think one of the trade-offs of that is that if that happens, right now we're kind of alone in Bitcoin because most of the world thinks we're crazy. Maybe we are. Maybe they're not wrong. But I think we're also going to be pretty alone in the future because most people that will have been into Bitcoin, most people will not enter Bitcoin until it has already reached gold parity. And Bitcoin is probably not going to be at gold parity when it's $1 million. Probably not even $2 million, right? Likewise, most people that buy MicroStrategy stock never knew it as MicroStrategy stock. In fact, they're confused why the stock ticker is MSTR because they only know it of the name strategy, right? You have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. This has been my point for a very long time. In fact, since the beginning of making content about Bitcoin online, we've less in common with the future and the past, whether it's the branding of your favorite Michael Saylor company or if it's Bitcoin versus gold. The dominant hard money in the world right now is gold. It still is, right? The gold market cap has increased more than the entire Bitcoin market cap in just the last year alone, right? So, we've less in common with the future and the past. And my encouragement is be careful what you wish for. And if all this happens, it's going to be hard to make Bitcoin friends. And this is why I'm thrilled to be putting on this little Prague retreat this upcoming June in Prague surrounding the BTC Prague conference. I'm pretty sure Michael Saylor is going to be there. There's going to be a lot of speakers there. Thousands of people are going to be there. This is a side private event. I've been talking about this thing I've been putting on for about a month now. Over half of the spots are taken, and the other half of the spots, most of them are already being eyed up by some people. So if you want to have an opportunity to get to know other people in Bitcoin, hang out with other people in Bitcoin with these beautiful scenes you're seeing on the screen here, private chef, intimate group of Bitcoiners. I'm trying to get some awesome speakers, wink, wink, trying to get some awesome speakers to stop by and have dinner with us all. I'm trying to create the best possible week for that event because I do believe this may be one of the last opportunities we have to hang out together, talk Bitcoin together, and enjoy Bitcoin when it was still in these tiny little nerdy beginning stages, right? And I really, really expect this event to be in massive demand, especially if the Czech Republic's central bank does come out and announce that they have bought billions of dollars of Bitcoin. That's obviously going to skyrocket attendance and demand for this Bitcoin conference because that's going to, change the entire landscape of Europe, Bitcoin-wise, in my opinion. So this is one of your last chances to sign up for this Prague special, Bitcoin-only retreat with an intimate group of Bitcoiners hanging out with some of the best views in the entire city, some of the best food in the entire city, some of the most unique experiences in the entire city, as well as some of the best speakers from the BTC Prague conference that are going to be stopping by. So lots of exciting things there. And again, the big argument is that be careful what you wish for. I really hope Bitcoin goes to the moon and that we're all happy and everything goes well. But as you've heard me say time and time again, everything has a trade-off. And the trade-off of not being bullish enough on Bitcoin and actually not internalizing, oh, wait, what if this thing actually goes to $500,000 a coin? Or, oh, wait, what if my MicroStrategy shares actually go to $2,000 to $3,000 a share, right? Once you actually internalize those numbers and you sit on those numbers and you go to sleep internalizing what kind of life change that would mean for your family, I think that's the best case why you should upgrade your self-custody situation. I think that's the best case why you should upgrade your tax situation and everything else. It's because nothing stops this train. Sooner than later, it's going to these really high numbers. And really, maybe that's the best place to end. Even if I'm wrong, even if we don't go to 400 grand of Bitcoin next year or this year, we're going there at some point. We're getting there eventually. The only question is when. And probably we're looking at a couple years difference of when. So please take the things I'm encouraging you to do seriously, upgrade to multi-sig, get an exit strategy for your MicroStrategy shares because you probably don't want to be holding a large number of shares on the way down in the market because if you have a higher allocation than you know what you probably should, you don't want to go through that. That's my encouragement. Most people in Bitcoin aren't listening to that advice. They aren't doing that. And I'm okay with that because people did always listen to my advice and people wouldn't necessarily need to hire me to fix their problems. So I'm okay with that. You can do what you want. You can hire me, you can hire somebody else, you can do whatever. That's great. Or you can do it on your own, figure it out on your own. That's great too. That's probably going to end up being the more expensive route for you to go. But that's my encouragement. Whatever you do, take it seriously. This thing is probably going way higher than what you expect, and it could be way sooner than what you expect. Not a guarantee, but it's a very real non-zero possibility.